Depression. We seem to hear that word a lot. And today's Bible study is going to be asking the question, are you as depressed as Jeremiah? And we're going to be in the book of Lamentations, and we're going to be looking at the 3rd chapter. And he's going to really tell us today all of the different aspects of his despair, discouragement, another word for depression. And today we're going to be talking about his perspective on what is happening. And we can compare that with how are we feeling in our feelings of depression. And we'll talk about that today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is helping you get more impact from your Bible study. We're with Tommy Thompson, and Tommy is down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'm up in Utah, and we are meeting together, and we're inviting you to come in and sit down with us. This is a real Bible study. There's no script. There's no rehearsal. This is what it looks like when two friends get together and look at the Bible. And today we're starting a 3-part series. I'm excited about this. This is a chapter in the Bible that has really spoken to my life a number of times, and I'll share some of that in a second. But this is Lamentations Chapter 3. Now, are you familiar with any of the background of Lamentations, when it was written, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a picture of when it was that. So the Jews had just basically been exiled into Babylon.
Okay.
And so you have people who are still actually in Jerusalem who are recognizing the major affliction of the city that has just been overtaken by the Babylonians.
A little history, a very little history, but real quick history. Now, Assyria had come down and captured Jerusalem at one time, and then Jerusalem started getting some independence again, and Babylon started to come down, and it came in, it took the whole area except for Jerusalem. And during that period of struggle against Babylon, Jeremiah, who was known as the weeping prophet, he prophesied that God was going to give Jerusalem over to the Babylonians for punishment for wandering away from worshiping God and wandering off into other gods and other idols in their lives. And he prophesied that God was going to punish Jerusalem. And that wasn't very popular in Jerusalem at the time. Now, this Lamentations is written after Jerusalem had fallen. So it's about 586 BC. Jerusalem falls to Babylon. It's a historical fact in 586 BC. And that begins the 70 years of captivity. Now, when that happens, Jeremiah doesn't write, "I told you so." He writes a lamentation. And there's 5 lamentations. The first lamentation is basically Jerusalem's sin of wandering away from God. Then second Lamentations is about God's wrath towards that sin. Then Lamentations 3 is a prayer about that. And Lamentations 4 is revisiting God's anger. And Lamentations 5 is a prayer for release. It talks about that during the 70 years of captivity, there will be a faithful remnant. Even though Jerusalem has been captured, Babylon is taking over, there will be a faithful remnant to God ongoing. And we'll see that in history. That's what happens. But we want to focus on Lamentations chapter 3. The reason for that is that Lamentations chapter 3 probably speaks more specifically to any of us that are going through a time of depression, a time of despair, a time of discouragement. And it really helps us learn We're going to do this in 3 parts. You ready?
I'm ready.
We're going to go from verse 1 to verse 18 in Lamentations chapter 3.
Okay.
And this is not a wonderful, uplifting section of scripture.
Yeah.
That it's pretty low. But what I want us to see is, how does it compare? How does what Jeremiah is feeling with this depression about what's going on in his nation and what's even going on with him personally, how does that compare with us who are going through discouraging times? All right, we're going to start. Why don't you read the first 9 verses, Tommy, and we'll just look at some observations about the first 9, and then I'll read the second 9 verses. Go ahead and read 1 to 9.
I am the man who has seen affliction because of the rod of his wrath. He has driven me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Surely against me he has turned his hand repeatedly all the day. He has caused my flesh and my skin to waste away. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and encompassed me with bitterness and hardship. In dark places he has made me dwell, like those who have long been dead. He has walled me in so that I cannot go out. He has made my chain heavy. Even when I cry out and call for help, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with hewn stones. He has made my paths crooked.
What do you notice in those verses? What jumps out at you, Tommy?
It's full of hardship in a lot of different ways.
One thing that I noticed was that there is significant blame towards God for his situation. There's not a lot of self, I did this and therefore I'm feeling this. If you notice, he has these terms. He has driven, he has turned, he has caused, he has broken, he has besieged, he has made me, he has walled, he made me this way. And he has blocked, he has made my path. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's in the midst of his despair and his depression, he puts all of the load on God. Now, it is clear, if you go back up to chapter 2, that God is showering his wrath on Jerusalem because of Jerusalem's sin. So it's very interesting that he's not talking here about, I'm feeling this way because of our action, or we did this, or we did that, and therefore I'm feeling this way. At this point, he knows that God is dealing with Jerusalem, and yet he puts God as he's responsible for how I'm feeling about it. When we go into a depression, we have a tendency to do a lot of, what are you doing, God? And why are you doing this? And why aren't you doing this other thing? Why are you doing this to me? And one of the things we want to do is we want to take some responsibility for, maybe I backed myself into this corner.
Yeah.
So as we go along, he says right away, I have seen affliction because of the rod of his wrath. So God is punishing Jerusalem for wandering away from fellowship with his covenant, or into disobedience. So it's clear. When he says, I have seen affliction, we're not going to turn to him, but let me give you 3 verses. In Psalm 119, when David is writing about affliction, he writes in verse 67, 71, and 75, they're noted right here, that there's a good thing about affliction. And that the good thing about affliction is it teaches me to be obedient. It drives me into the word. And those are some verses that you might want to go and explore in Psalm 119. So anyway, then he starts a list, and I've numbered them off. You can see my numbers off here on the side. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, down as we go. But I want to talk about these. There's 18 actions that his perception is God is taking, and they're very familiar to us. Now, I had been unemployed for 3 years in my career. My career literally was taking a hiatus, and I just couldn't get another job. I just went through all kinds of things, and I was depressed. My lovely wife stepped up and she made the money for us. But during that period, I was really wondering, what are you doing to me, God? Why am I here? What's going on? And I really went through a period of depression. And this chapter 3 helped me. So I want to relate that to our experiences as we go here. So the first thing in verse 2, he has driven me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Have you ever felt that way, that you're stumbling around in a dark room?
Oh, yeah.
And you want to know what to do and where to go and what you should do. And there's just nothing but dark in front of you. And he says, he's driven me to walk around in a dark room, and I have no light as far as seeing where I should go. The next verse, surely against me he has turned his hand repeatedly all the day. It just seems like God is against you. He has turned against me. Now, it isn't necessarily because Jeremiah has sinned. In fact, Jeremiah, as a prophet, was telling Jerusalem, hey, you guys need to straighten up and get back in. God has sent me to tell you this. But he still responds with depression when this is what's happening to my country. And I think some of us can relate to that it seems like God has turned his hand against us, and we're just all day long, we're in a tough situation. Let's keep going.
All right.
In verse 4, because these are all feelings that we can relate to. I have felt like he drove me into darkness before. I have felt that he's turned his hand against me in my life. Yikes. And in verse 4, he has caused my flesh and my skin to waste away. He has broken my bones. This is talking about disease. A lot of times when we're depressed, we get sick.
Yeah.
Physically sick when we're emotionally sick. And he says, he has besieged me and encompassed me with bitterness and hardship. This is a picture in Hebrew of an attack on a fort, on a city. And you're besieged, you're completely surrounded, you're encompassed. And it just seems like from all sides it's pressing in on you. I can relate to that. In verse 6, in dark places he has made me dwell. Oh, man. Like those who have long been dead. It just seems like time in the word is nothing. Prayer is nothing. In fact, he's going to talk about prayer. He has walled me in, verse 7. He has walled me in so that I cannot go out. He has made my chain heavy. Now, that's the way it seems in life. But if you look down, read verse 27 in Lamentations 3.
It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth.
So this chain is heavy. It feels like a heavy yoke. Later on, he's going to say, it's a good thing I'm young and strong. I can carry this yoke. But later on in Matthew, Jesus is talking and he says, hey, take my yoke on you. My yoke is light. My burden is light. And when we're in depression, we go, that doesn't seem very light to me. So we're going to see what happens here as we go along. He has walled me in, so I can't go out. I have no options. I can't go anywhere. And this is a heavy burden. Verse 8, even when I cry out and call for help, he shuts out my prayer. And a lot of times when I've been depressed and I've prayed and it seems like my prayer goes up and hits a ceiling and just comes back, bounces back. God's not even listening. But that's a perception on my part. That's not a reality, and we'll see that. And he'll realize that. I'll talk about that in a moment. He has blocked my ways with hewn stone. He has He has made my paths crooked. That's now the idea of a straight path was a blessing of God. He's made my path straight. But an idea of a crooked path is I'm trying this, I'm trying that, and I'm trying this didn't work, so I'm trying that. And my life is just this crooked path of being all over the place because of my discouragement and my despair. Verse 9, he's blocked my ways with hewn stone. I'm running against roadblocks. That's where we get this idea. God has put roadblocks in my way. I'm going through this trial, and it just seems like roadblock after roadblock. Verse 10, he is to me like a lion in secret places. So there are times in the believer's life when God takes action, and it's a scary action.
Yeah.
It's especially when we're off, as Jerusalem was, we're off in sin, we're doing our own thing. We're thinking, oh, God's not paying attention. God's waiting. And he's waiting. He uses the same terminology as in verse 10. He's waiting like a bear. He's waiting like a lion to pounce and to judge and punish us back, to get us back onto the right path. So in our depression, one of the things we're asking is, wait a minute, this isn't all God's. This could be my fault. So am I taking the wrong path here? God may use that to teach me some lessons. Verse 11, he has turned aside my ways and torn me to pieces. That's back to this idea of he's waited for me. I feel torn when I come over and when he's moving me to the right side of the path. He bent his bow and set me as a target for the arrow. He made the arrows of his quiver enter my inward parts. Boy, depression, it feels like God is shooting arrows into our hearts. It feels awful. God using me for target practice. Now you notice it's still all on God. He has done this, he has done this, he has done this. Now, verse 14 to 18 has been really instrumental in my life, and let me read it. I have become a laughing stock to my people, their mocking song all the day. He has filled me with bitterness. He has made me drink the wormwood. He has broken my teeth with gravel. He has made me cower in the dust. My soul has been rejected from peace. I have forgotten happiness. So I say, my strength has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. And it ends there at verse 18. These are more actions that God has taken, up to 18 actions up in verse 16. So we see this. This is really a discouraging list of things that are his perception in his depression. One of the big things for me was verse 14. I have become a laughing stock to all my people, their mocking song all day long. Now, as Christians, when we go through tough times, how does that verse relate, Tommy?
Yeah, it just seems like everything's wrong and everybody seems to notice it. And they just seem like everything you've got going on is just not the way it's supposed to be. So they mock you for it.
Okay, set up this scenario. You're a believer and you've been witnessing to your family about the salvation, the eternal life, and the peace that you can have as a believer. And you've been witnessing to them. And maybe they're starting to listen, maybe not. But then you go through a real tough time. A death, a divorce, an illness, a job, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, they're going, hey, look, if this God is so great and you're a Christian, how come he doesn't give you a job? How come he doesn't heal you? How come he doesn't do that? You've been talking through the wrong side of your face, because now you're going through these tough times and you're saying you're a Christian, but God doesn't seem to be answering your prayers. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's very easy to say, oh man, my going through this tough time is destroying my testimony, my non-believing friends and family. When really, how we go through these trials is reinforcing the testimony.
Yeah.
So instead of being depressed, we can say, Lord, help me walk through this trial in a way that testifies of your goodness. And he's going to talk about that from verse 19 on in part 2. That really spoke to me, that I felt embarrassed because I was going through a hard time, and people at church would come up and say, has the Lord given you a job yet? And I'd go, no. And so I'm thinking, they're thinking that there's something wrong with me. They're thinking that I'm in sin or something because God is not giving me what I need, or not whatever it is. And we can get so focused on what other people are doing and laughing and saying that we forget to go to God. And so we're blaming God and we're forgetting God in this group. And he's filled me with bitterness. And when I try to chew on the situation, my teeth are just full of gravel. It just sounds like there's,
Yeah.
And then at the very end, 17 and 18, he says, my soul has been rejected from peace. So he's got no peace. I have forgotten happiness. So there's no happiness. And another word for happiness is blessing. I have forgotten what it feels like to be blessed. So I say, my strength has perished. So he's got no strength. And he says, and so has my hope perished from the Lord. My confidence. The word hope just means a confidence. So you go, well, man, when we're depressed, we can feel no peace, no strength in what we're doing, and certainly no hope of it's going to change.
Yeah.
I've met with guys where they go through a scenario of what's wrong. And they say, I got no joy. I got no happiness. The future looks dark. I am so discouraged. I just don't know what to do. Boy, that's a description right out of Lamentations Chapter 3, 17 and 18. And I take them there. And then I take them into part 2 that we're going to do next week. So don't be discouraged. Look at this for what it is. It's just a description of how he's feeling about his circumstances. The good thing is I can relate to that. There's nothing holier than thou. Oh, you shouldn't feel this. You shouldn't feel it. No, you're going to feel that. It's at times in your life, you're going to have despair. You're going to have discouragement. You're going to have even depression. What do we do about it is in next week's Bible study. Now, I wanted to end with one thing that's not mentioned in verse 17 and 18 is joy. And I want you to flip over to James chapter 1, verse 2.
Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness.
Okay. Now, it's very interesting here that's not on this list. He also has no joy, obviously. Yeah. Why? Because his perspective of his circumstances is not counting it joy because it's going to teach him something, because it's going to strengthen his faith. He's looking at the circumstances and focusing on what God is doing and what God is not doing. And that focus is the wrong focus. We should be praising God in the midst of trials. Listen to me. We should be praising God in the midst of trials and saying, what is God trying to teach me? Where is God trying to strengthen my faith? Where is God trying to confirm my hope? Yeah. And that's where Jeremiah is going to go, starting at verse 19 next week. Any conclusions or summations?
For me, one of the things that I really thought about is really even the conviction under sin. I mean, I guess that's where I really was, when I was studying it, really thinking about the conviction under sin, and remembering again some older verses about how it was prophesied that Israel was going to turn away from God. They were actually going to experience the curses. This goes back into Deuteronomy, and where they were going to experience the curses of God. And so some actually remembered God in those times.
And
And
we're gonna see there
Yeah.
is a faithful remnant
exactly.
that gets it. And
Yeah.
Jeremiah is included in that. But Jeremiah is showing us that even if we know there's sin, if you read the book of Jeremiah, he's called the weeping prophet because the book of Jeremiah, God called Jeremiah to tell Israel they were sinning.
Yeah.
They needed to repent and get back, and they didn't. And as a
Right.
result, God judges them. And you see that in Lamentations chapter 1 and chapter 2. But he judges them and pours his wrath upon them. But that sets up a circumstance that Jeremiah wants to make sure that we understand. He's felt it. He's been there.
Yeah.
And even as a prophet doing the will of God and saying this is going to happen, he still says that has put me into a circumstance that's a tough circumstance. And I've had this reaction to it until the but, and we're going to see the but next week.
All right.
Great study for us.
Yeah.
If you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling despair, discouragement in life, I've known pastors who have been very discouraged in life and have gone to chapter 3 of Lamentations and worked through that depression with victory at the end. And that's our promise as we go into part 2 next week. Today, we've been talking about all these aspects of depression and our tendency to totally blame God on what's happening in our lives. Some of it may be by our own doing. Others may be God working in our lives. I want to recommend a video to you called Why Do We Go Through Tests and Trials? It's out of the book of James, and I think it'll be a blessing to you. And listen, we're going to continue in Lamentations, the second part of a 3-part series when we come back next week. And until then, God bless you.